All right. We covered a lot. We've got several very complex questions. So I will go through the questions, but as we do, if you have questions currently, do put them in the chat because we're not going to have a lot of time at the end. So go ahead and pop them in there and I'll answer them best I can. But with that said, let's go through them. Question: I'm dealing with a collection that began in 1975, but nothing was formalized until my hire in 2021. There are a lot of items with no deed of gift, or there are deeds of gift that are signed, but the descriptions are useless. For example, supplies, or 15 bottles, or assorted miscellaneous photographs. A lot of the items were never stored properly and are in cardboard boxes. A lot of it has rodent feces and urine on them. Some items are in really bad shape from neglect and will never be in shape to display. And I don't think some should even be available for research as they could be hazardous. How do I deaccession something that has never been accessioned? Which is the crux of it, right? So first of all, um, I I feel you on all of these, and you're not alone. So thank you for sharing these very vivid and realistic examples. In the cases where there's no paperwork, and if you're an archives versus museum, either way, I would reference you to the abandoned property laws just for like a CYA. Make sure you know the rules for your particular state. Because it's been in operation for so long, your museum, I would document, and in fact, I think I may have outlined, yes. So follow the found in collection guidance and then document how long you may have had that property, even if it's just like, oh, I remember we had that, when Susie was curator and that was 1980 or what have you. So that counts in terms of how long you've had the item or items. But I do add, given the hazardous nature and that there's risk to both the collection, but also risk to staff health and actually like researcher community health too, I would argue that these items are at greater risk if they stay. So my recommendation would be to document like the extent of the items and the damage, and then run it by your board or any other sort of necessary sign-offs to evict and destroy those items. So I would recommend doing that due diligence about abandoned property, but I also want to acknowledge that the situation that you described the collections in is not good for you or for the rest of the collection. So in this case, documentation and making like an extenuating circumstances decision and documenting how bad it is for your records is my recommendation. Question: I have a question about deaccessioning digital items. While it seems like much of the paperwork aspect of deaccessioning is similar for physical and digital items, how should one go about deaccessioning the actual digital file? They are usually being deaccessioned as they are poor quality files, so it's unlikely any other institutions would want them, as one might do with physical items. So yes, so my answer: disposal is an option. Um, I love the intent of wanting to make sure that you're considering your options and that you have outlined poor quality files probably doesn't make sense for it to go anywhere else. And so I just want to underscore disposal absolutely is an option, especially if you're not necessarily missing any like unique content or information in doing so. My second distant recommendation might be like if you're practicing digital preservation methods and wanting to experiment, those may be great experiment files, but otherwise I think they can go. Question: how might we handle dispersal of potentially 50 of the same thing where we're not able to find homes in fellow institutions for more than a few and find ourselves with 20 to 30 deaccessioned objects that we still have to house? So for these particular items that you have so many, even after rehoming some of them, if there's not an option to return to the owner, you've already hit up the peer institutions, and there's no market appetite, then educational uses may be of interest, whether at your institution or another. You can consider donation, and this may be like the Goodwill donation kind of thing to consider, or disposal. So if you've sort of exhausted all the other disposal methods, there's not a market to sell, it doesn't make sense to give it to Goodwill, then disposal can be considered. Question: if we were to come to auction after all of those appropriate and proper steps to reach this outcome, of course, would we be flooding the market? So for context for everybody, a continuation on the, I think 50 of the same object, and giving some to peer institutions, but still having like 20 or 30 to deal with. So it depends, obviously, it depends on what the object is, the time of the market. If you're looking at US market versus global market, quite possibly, if you're bringing that many objects of the same thing. Doing a little bit of market research and connecting with an expert, whether that's an appraiser, whether that's reaching out to an auction house that deals with those kinds of items, would be probably my first stop in terms of like weighing, is it worth it or not? Both in terms of flooding the market, but also like, is it worth selling? What's the market value? So connecting with an expert can be helpful there. And then follow-up question, what if the market is supremely uninterested? What do those consequences look like? And so it depends on if you have the luxury of time, in terms of if you sold 1 or 2 objects a year, for example. I know you've got 20 to 30, so you're looking at a while. But if you have the patience, if you have the time, if it makes sense, then yes, you could wait and do like a drip feed of selling. You could also consider other markets. So yes, there's the US market, but you could also make sure, depending on what it is, work with an auction house, take it to different markets, that kind of thing. So you have a few different options, again, depending on like the worth it factor. And then next question, when a decision is reached to deaccession an object, what are best practices related to informing the original donors? So the typical best practice for informing donors, and if applicable, offering to return. So my recommendation is always an offer to return in that exchange. However, that doesn't necessarily need to happen. You can just inform donors, hey, we're deaccessioning, however, we intend to transfer to this museum or what have you. You can inform them of the particulars of the disposal method. The follow-up to that is, we're in a Canadian context, is returning the object to the original donor an option. And so Canada or not, US, Australia, etc., returning the object to the donor is always an option. And typically, as I've said, the one I recommend doing first, especially if the donor's still around or there's next of kin. Might you share examples of contacting donors who have given work to let them know about deaccessioning the work? So yes, so I've created a little blurb for you all, and it's pretty formulaic in terms of the points we're hitting and the order we are hitting them. As you may recall our slide a little bit earlier, we're starting out with gratitude for them having donated the item. We really lay on the, like, it was meaningful. So just because we're doing something else with the object doesn't mean it's not meaningful. We take great pride in our mission. So this is expressing and gently educating about, we have this mission, and part of why we're contacting you is because we are meeting our mission, and this is part of it. We've identified the item for deaccessioning, underscore deaccessioning as a normal part of collection stewardship, and allows us, again, emphasis for us to do our jobs, allocate resources. For this particular note, I put, before we consider alternatives, we wish to return or offer to return the item to you. I've stipulated in this case, please notify us in 30 days if that's what you want. If you've already made the decision or a partial decision, like, oh, you intend to give it to this institution, you swap this sentence out for explaining that. Oftentimes I find the donors do not want it back, and they just want you to make a decision with what to do with it. So oftentimes, if you're not straight up offering to return, or if it's like a second reply, telling them specifically what your decision will be can be very helpful, and they'll usually be very appreciative about it. All right, what are best practices for deaccessioning when the materials are found in collection? They were never accessioned in the first place. There are no accession records or inventory, no documentation, no object ID numbers. Much of our holdings are in this category. They date from the "we take everything and document nothing" period, which is a well-known period in our field, um, in their period of development. Are we required to use Illinois abandoned property laws for museums an 8-year period to remove these from our holdings? Quite possibly. And then can we document that we removed and what happened to the objects just as we would with a deaccession? Yes. We are drowning in these objects and it's impacting our ability to collect, house, and move forward. We need an efficient and timely solution to this problem. So yes, so you're in Illinois, so you can definitely check out the Spurlock Museum example because they also cite Illinois law. And you have reference, but making sure you review and aren't sort of being in direct conflict with whatever the abandoned property law for Illinois is. I recommend heavily investigating and using institutional memory as part of your information gathering to help correlate, even if it's a rough timeline for when certain sets of items came in. Because if you can document that, and given that your institution in its period of just willy-nilly collecting, if you can assign like even a decade to that, like these were all collected in the 80s, then you have definitely by far met the Illinois 8-year requirement for things being considered abandoned. And for all of this, of course, it's to the best extent possible. So we may not know all the facts 100% with confidence, but to the best extent possible, we have determined this, and documentation, etc., will help with that case. So yes, document research, when the things may have came in, how you can maybe help correlate those facts, what your findings were, and your recommendation and decision based on those findings, and then ultimately the action. And it may even be worth doing like that notice like USC did, where you do a series of public notices, also in good faith, just to highlight that this was not something that was just sort of done informally or impulsively, and just another like CYA in terms of like following law, but also trying to do the right thing. And then, of course, if you have a board, if you have legal counsel, like consulting with those experts so that it's not necessarily your particular butt on the line, but having those cleared by people who may have more expertise in this area. So we've got tons of resources for you. Just real quickly, we have them organized by the different professional organizations that have provided these for us. So you have a copy of the slide deck. You can check these out. Also, as we reference them in the slides, we provided links so you can see where those were from. I do have both museum and archives in here in terms of deaccessioning resources, institutional examples, and then I also have linked the news articles that we took a look at, but as well as news articles that I used during putting the slide deck together or that I've read in the past about this particular topic. So if you enjoy reading about that, go check them out. Otherwise, thank you so much. Thanks for sticking around for this topic. It is a complex and difficult one, and we don't have it all quite figured out just yet. And yet it is such a desperately needed and important aspect of our work. So I hope you found this helpful, and I wish you a good rest of your day. Thank you.